Welcome, everyone. Um, this is a meeting where the students of the Viktor Frankl Institute of Logotherapy in Israel have an opportunity to present their diplomat project. And so the student presenting today is Rani Donetz, and he's a senior life coach and workshop facilitator since 2003. He's coached hundreds of people and recently dedicated himself to meaning centered coaching to help people navigate life transitions, crises, and challenges while cultivating hope and connecting to their inner wisdom. So that hope is going to be the theme of his project and his presentation. He has developed saging, which is conscious aging, to find meaning in later years in life. Um, Personal education is important to him, and he went to East Asia for 5 years, immersed himself in many languages, martial arts. He believes that meaning, hope, and authenticity are gateways to a fulfilling life. So, you know a little bit about who he is. And he calls himself a seeker. And I can certainly attest to that because he was a pain in the neck student, which are the best kind, because, he was always pushing, to find an answer. And if it wasn't a satisfying answer, he pushed some more and it had to make sense to him.
You
And
weren't supposed to say that, but okay.
and he researches a lot, he talks to a lot of people, and he persistently looks for a way to make sense out of things. After all, meaning is about making sense, but it is so much more than that. So I'm going to give the floor over to Rani to do his presentation.
Okay, well, thank you very much, Batya, and thank you to all the people who've come in. Some of the people here I know are logotherapy students, and you know all about logotherapy. Others are just friends and contacts and colleagues of mine through the years, and so I appreciate your coming here and sharing this with me. Just a little basics how it's going to work. During the first hour, I have my presentation to share with you. And towards the end of that presentation, hopefully in the first hour, maybe a little over, there'll be a 10-minute film of my father's Holocaust testimony. And then we'll have a couple of kind of short moments of silence and let people who have to leave for the second hour do so. And then we can go and begin our discussion, which Batya will lead. Um, I just want to say, please keep yourself on mute because sometimes it gets problematic, and I'm not going to look at the chat. So if you want someone to know, Batya will look at the chat. But I hope you have a
I
good
won't
and
look at the chat
interesting.
either.
Yeah. Okay.
You just have to raise your hand.
Right. Right. And so I thank you again for taking your time. I know it's sometimes the middle of the day here, and I'm very moved and inspired by you all. So I'm going to sh share my screen. All right. So the name of my presentation here is Hope Remembered, Hope Renewed, a Logotherapy Perspective. So where are we going today? What's the game plan? Well, I want to invite you into my journey. I really mean journey because it has been a journey of at least a year and a half, if not more, maybe 2.5 years into what I call meaning and hope. I want to tell you a bit how it all started. The project I ran called Conversations on Meaning, which is kind of a way station. When I started to discover what it means by post-traumatic growth, when I actually went into the topic of hope and came up with a program called Hope Accelerator, which I've done online a number of times now, I want to share with you how I see the connection between logotherapy and hope, and looking at some of the literature out there. And what I really feel is a symbiotic bond between meaning and hope, the central principles of Viktor Frankl's logotherapy, and how that is connected to hope. And I wanted to share with you four stories, case studies that go deep. The last one being the one of my father. And then I'll go right into showing a very shortened film, but a very powerful, emotional film of his testimony uh, during the Holocaust. So I want to start by saying that at age 61, and during COVID, I decided I needed to do something more meaningful in my life because a lot of things turned down. And I said I wanted to go ahead and pursue a doctorate degree. And I did so at a place which was online called Ubiquity University. And I wanted to find out more or less how the second generation of Holocaust survivors, children, how they see their lives in retrospect. There was a lot of work about Holocaust survivors' children in the earlier days, but very little about what happens when they get older. And this is also a place that I did my own personal journey in writing, as well as interviewing 41 second generations in 11 countries around the world. So part of what I wanted to do, and because I had the ability, I had the privilege of doing also a personal reflection during my kind of unorthodox doctorate, I wanted to go back to my father's town, kind of a sleepy town of 7,000 people in the western Belarus, and called Zhetel in Yiddish, Jatlova in Russian. And I wanted to go back there and write my last chapter of the doctorate, my personal reflection while I was there in the town, which I did so. And I took a bus into the town, and I was privileged to be hosted by a wonderful couple who had lived all their lives in this little town where my father grew up and his family was killed. All the Jews were annihilated. And they were born just after the war, and we became very friendly. And I showed them this very film that I'm showing you today, only with Russian subtitles. So here's where I'm standing, and the place where my grandparents' house used to be is no longer there. It was quite an emotional experience being this place, and it really, I must say, it epitomized a lot of the work that I'd done over the last 3-4 years. I was also able to share this story and experiences of my father with a group of high school students, and showed this film with Russian subtitles as well there. When I was there, I went to the grave, mass grave of where the 2,500 people of Zhetel were annihilated, and I also went and I went there and put on the grave of my grandparents and uncles and aunts. I took some sand from my father's grave in Israel and placed it on the mass grave, and I had a very emotional and very meaningful journey. And when I came back to Israel, something happened. And what happened a month later was October 7, 2023. Now, I'm sure you all know all that happened that day of 1,200 Israelis being killed and 250 hostages being taken. I want to say this is not a political discussion at all. I have nothing about that in my dissertation at all. But I wanted to share with you that this was a day of seismic change and a watershed event for all Israelis, I would say, most Israelis, certainly for me in my own emotional landscape. And here I was asking myself, what do we do now? The trauma was so great, and even to this day it is. And I said to myself, how can I be meaningful? How can I help? And what happened is that there's a tremendous surge of volunteering in Israel after the time. And everyone wanted to help in some way. And no one knew exactly what to do. And I didn't know what to do. I had been a life coach for many years. I had been a group facilitator, but no one seemed to want me. If you weren't a therapist with work in post-trauma, you couldn't find your way. So I did the first thing that came to me intuitively. I went and I did online. I had a project with a video editor in which I put together a short video and talking about what it meant to me as a second generation to view the situation that just happened a month ago. And I remember in this video saying, and never again will Jews be hunted down, murdered, their bodies mutilated, their humanity denied. I felt it very strongly then, and I still do today. But what I want to say is that this is the emotional landscape that I went ahead and tried to find out what I can do. Well, what can I do? And then I looked to where I am today. So I had been a student already, an advanced student of logotherapy for over a year by that time, almost 2 years. And I'm sure you all know about Viktor Frankl. I'll say a little bit about him for those who don't know. I said I should look to Viktor Frankl because maybe via logotherapy, intuitively I felt that people who are going through trauma, people who are going through such a tremendous crisis, they look for meaning. So I went to Viktor Frankl. Of course, Viktor Frankl was an Austrian Jew, and he was a doctor, a neurologist, a psychiatrist, also a philosopher. He had, in his earlier times, he had corresponded with Freud. He had entered into a group with Alfred Adler, and then he exited that group. And before the war, he already developed a theme called logotherapy, which was, he felt, and I'll say in a minute what it means, that we are mostly motivated not by drives, not by power, not by pleasure, but by the search for meaning. And I think most of you have heard the book Man's Search for Meaning. He wrote right after the war. The name came later, became a bestseller for many, many years, because it really talks about what it means to search for meaning in great uncertainty and crisis. The major building blocks of meaning, and I'm sorry for logotherapy students, you're hearing this a second time, but or I just want to make sure everyone's on the same page. That there is a will to meaning. That's a major drive of human beings. They have a freedom of will, and there is meaning in life. And the last point is that we are not only physical and psychological beings, we are spiritual beings. The noetic dimension is very, very important for Frankl. It's that piece that is inside us that normal, or I would say,
I don't know what happened to the sound here with Ronnie.
Yeah, we lost Ronnie.
He looks like
Yeah.
he froze.
Yeah,
Give it a minute.
yeah.
Ronnie, if you can hear us, you're a little bit chilly. You're frozen. Hey, Ronnie, if you can hear, I would suggest you log off and log back on, and that might jumpstart the connection.
I'm gonna give him a call on the phone also.
Thank
Suggest
you.
that. Turn my phone on first.
I sent him a message already. I can call him too.
Oh, yeah, could you
Okay.
call him? Thank you. In case he doesn't hear us here, you can call him.
Do you want me to call or are you going to call?
Yeah, can you call him? Yeah.
Sure. He may not answer because he thinks he's on
Yeah.
So in the
There.
meantime,
I will go upstairs. I'm his wife.
He already went out and came in again, so let's see.
he's
what
come
happens.
back in. Yeah.
yes, very sorry about that. Don't know what happened.
Okay.
Okay. I don't know what you heard, but we'll go back here. All right.
You're back, buddy.
You were just
Okay.
talking about the noetic dimension.
Okay. Right. So sorry for that. We're back here. So Frankl says that meaning is unique in every moment, and it changes and it evolves through time. But I think the last part is very important. Frankl also mentioned that we have responsibility. It's not just the will to meaning, but we respond to life. I have a responsibility, my ability to respond and to listen to life, which is very, very central in how Frankl sees things. Frankl says life has meaning even in the most miserable circumstances. You always have the ability to go ahead and take a stand. With that in mind, I went and thought to myself, I want to create a project because no one seems to want my help. I want to be able to bring the idea of meaning to people who need it. And I went and I actually conferred with Batya, and I began a project called Conversations on Meaning. That I went ahead and I initiated contact with people through Facebook, people who I knew who were out there talking about their experiences on the 7th of October, family members or the people themselves. And can everybody hear me, by the way? Yeah?
Yep.
Okay.
Yep.
All right. So I want to tell you a bit about the people who I talked with. I had about 11, 12 people, conversations, very, very meaningful. But it was all my own work. I was all going out there and finding a way to find people. And I was really sensing that I was onto something, but I didn't really know quite what. So I'll talk about the first survivors I spoke to from the Nova Festival, Amir and Shira. And when I talked to them, and I felt an immediate bond. And they talked to me how they hid in the bushes where the terrorists were shooting everyone. And Amir remembered fearing and saying, you know, I kind of feel that fear is love. It's something that even though I'm very, very afraid, I find that I'm in love with my life. Shira who was his girlfriend, she was also very afraid, but she later told me she faced tremendous survivor's guilt and she went to therapy. Because I noticed the same people were together, had the same trauma, but they had different meanings, but both of them were very, very meaningful to them. Nira and Jill, another couple, they hid from Hamas at the Nova Festival. They were busy saving people's lives. Nir said to me, once I was very underconfident, but suddenly today I feel I've done something in my life. I have a voice. I can talk about what I did. He says, I know I've been wounded in my life, but I feel now I have something that I can share. I can lecture. I can spread hope and love. Arin Gantz, and I'm talking about their names because they're publicly known. The mother of Eden Zacharia, Eden was their daughter, 29 years old. She was killed at the Nova Festival and taken hostage into Gaza. And I met with Arin. And I went to, and Arin, a very special woman. She had been very involved in self-empowerment groups, and she said to me, "I want to put together a group to help people, not people who are victims, but just in general." She called it Chevruta, which is a Hebrew name for together. And I went to one of her meetings. I found it's amazing how this woman who has so much pain, she is dealing with her pain by self-transcendence, by giving to others. Finally, I spoke to Iris Chaim, a very well-known woman. She's been online all over. The mother of Yotam Chaim. Yotam was a boy, was already a young man, who had emotional challenges, and he was taken from his kibbutz, and he was taken captive in Gaza. Unfortunately, he tried to escape, and he and two of his colleagues were killed by accident by the Israel Defense Forces. He was a drummer, a heavy metal fan, and when Iris talks about Yotam's story, she talked about it in a way, she said, listen, Yotam was a partisan. He was one who did his own thing. He had this feeling that he was going to search for life, and he went and tried to escape. And she said, I think for me, that's a sign that I must choose gratitude and responsibility. I want to go ahead and see the good in life. And she's gone on and talked around the world about her experiences. So my insights from these conversations are like this. I found that there's a very strong need to bring a search for meaning into caring for people with traumatic events. No doubt about that. I'm not sure when the right timing is, because I see that at the very early stages, they're not there yet, but quite early, they're asking questions. Why did it happen to me? What does it mean that it happened to me? And these are philosophical, existential questions in addition to therapeutic situations. I sense a great gap between what local therapy has to offer and its actual application in crisis situations. So that brought me to the concept of post-traumatic growth. I didn't know too much about it. It sounded like a good idea. And I started to research. My research brought me to a place called the Boulder Crest Foundation. It's a U.S. nonprofit organization which serves the military, the veterans, and the first responders in the States. And their mission is to create post-traumatic growth for those people who've been injured by their service. Not an organization that treats, it trains people. And I reached out to the CEO of the company, and I told him all about what I'm doing, Viktor Frankl. And he said, listen, you got to speak to Dr. Richard Tedeschi, because he's the guy who is part of he's executive director. He created the term post-traumatic growth with his colleague, Lawrence Calhoun. And they said to me, yes, you're right. Viktor Frankl is one of our teachers. And we have we've done many years of research. And Tedeschi spoke about the years where he was a director of a support group of parents who had lost children, mostly to cancer. And they did thousands of studies on people, and they noticed something very, very interesting. That although post-traumatic stress disorder is prominent, but what happens is people, not everyone, not all the time, not immediately, they do develop 5 domains of post-traumatic growth. They find a way that through their suffering, through their trauma, sometime they reach a new type of growth. Different resilience by bouncing back, it's creating a growth. And he talked about 5 different areas. I won't go into too much here, where people realize that suddenly they have more strength than they ever thought about. They have an existential or spiritual change in how they see the world. They suddenly value their relationships with people in a much greater way. And they kind of filter out those kinds of people who don't do them very well. They have a a deeper appreciation of life, and many times they suddenly find new possibilities. Now, this doesn't mean that trauma is good. It means that even when you have trauma, there is a way for some people, maybe not all, to find growth. And that really connected me with logotherapy. But as I studied more and more about post-traumatic growth, I realized there's another concept that I have to give some attention to. It's called hope. Because something about knowing about PTG gives an individual hope, hope to reclaim, hope to reborn. And I found that this is something I must find out more about because hope doesn't seem to be a major subject of discussion. So I went ahead and I said, what can I learn about hope? What is hope? Well, hope is one of those things that's very hard to define because we have these terms like hope and meaning and love. We know they're there. We know they're prominent. We know they're very, very strong, but we don't actually know how to explain them or define them. So I want to share a few quotations which moved me very much. One is Lao She, not Lao Tzu, the Chinese philosopher. Lao She was a Chinese writer in the 20th century. He wrote, sometimes out of despair, hope bursts forth. So something about hope is we only really talk about it when we have some deep, deep pain, deep despair. Elie Wiesel, the prominent Holocaust survivor, professor, and author, he said, just as man cannot live without dreams, he cannot live without hope. If dreams reflect the past, hope summons the future. So something about hope is connected to the future. Desmond Tutu, the theologian and activist, the late activist in South Africa, he wrote, hope is being able to see that there is light despite all the darkness. It doesn't mean that there's no darkness. Hope is a way of seeing things differently. And finally, there is a quote of C.R. Snyder. I'll talk about him in a moment, who was a professor of clinical psychology. He is the developer of the hope theory. He says, hope is like a rainbow. What does it mean to be a rainbow? You have different shades there, different colors. It's different to different people at different times, but it's there. It's there to enlighten you. So, how we define it? Go to a dictionary and tell you hope is a belief or expectation that something good will come and accompanied by some kind of motivation. Okay, that's definition, but I want to talk about the difference between hope and optimism because we get them mixed up. We often use them interchangeably. Hope is different than optimism. Hope is goal-focused. It's action-oriented, and it's finding pathways even in adversity. I'm talking now more about the hope theory in a minute. But optimism is different. You can be an optimistic guy because you just believe, it will be okay. But doesn't mean you have a plan. Doesn't mean you're going to action. So optimism is good, I think. But it's different than hope because hope is a proactive thing. It's much more specific. And I'm talking about that. What I found is that all religions, wherever you are, they've always talked about hope. I can hardly think of a religion that I've seen through my years, and I've studied a few, I don't talk about hope. And when I did my Hope Accelerator online with Rwanda, I got feedback. 80% of them talked about something to do with belief in God and the religion. So I saw they were seeing hope through the religious frame. Christianity has hope, salvation, resurrection. Islam has hope for Allah's mercy, trust in God. Buddhism, which is not considered something that you would think so much, but has hope, I think, in liberation from suffering, for the Eightfold Path and the Four Noble Truths. There's a way of, they don't use the word hope, but I think that is hope. Hinduism has hope in karma and rebirth, and the indigenous traditions see hope in harmony with nature, even though they don't use this term exactly. But Judaism is the religion I know best, and I think it's very, very endemic to Judaism, because the idea of the Messiah, that Messiah will come one day and will bring peace on earth, will bring the Jews back to the land of Israel, will bring a new dawn for humanity. That's a whole big hope concept. Jews every year on the Passover Seder, at the end of the Seder, they sing next year in Jerusalem, even though they have no idea they're going to be in Jerusalem. Zionism, which many of you know, but may not know a lot about Zionism, is a mostly secular movement, which was born in the 19th century, is a hope-driven movement to create a Jewish homeland for Jews from around the world. Rabbi Jonathan Sacks, the late Rabbi Jonathan Sacks, the former rabbi of the UK, said something very powerful. It's not too much to say that the Jews kept hope alive and hope kept the Jewish people alive. I think it's a wonderful, wonderful statement there. But I think it's important to know that hope was not always viewed positively. For example, if you go to the Greek philosophers, Plato was quite suspicious of hope. He saw it as some type of deceptive illusion that you're getting, you're not doing the truth. We want you on the truth, not these kind of hope things. But Aristotle was a bit different than Plato. He said it's constructive because hope gives passion to the youth and courage. So he saw it as in a positive way. The Stoics weren't big on hope either. They thought that hope and fear are dangerous twins. The true freedom, according to the Stoics, comes from letting go of the future expectations and living with virtue in the present. So they didn't really very much stress the concept of hope. Thomas Aquinas, though, a 13th century philosopher, and Kierkegaard, the father of existential philosophy, embraced hope. In fact, Kierkegaard said, hope is a passion for the possible. Camus, Sartre, Heidegger, big names in existential philosophy, didn't really go for hope very much. They distanced themselves. Not that they opposed it. They thought it was not the right point, not what we're looking for. But Nietzsche, amazing Nietzsche, once wrote, in reality, hope is the worst of all evils because it prolongs man's torments. I think what they're talking about here is a false hope, a hope that doesn't have any action behind it, any grounding behind it. And Nietzsche said many, many things. So we now know that we can understand hope from different angles, in different times, different emotion. But is hope an emotion? Is it a cognitive construct? Is it a mindset, a process, or maybe all of the above? So I want to look at psychology. Like, what did psychology say about hope? Well, Freud was not very interested in hope. He was interested in the unconscious drives and instincts. He was very deterministic. Hope didn't factor in very big in his theory. Adler had more respect for the hope concept, seeing it as a possibility for change. But it was only with the humanists that hope gained a bigger stature. Erikson, Maslow, Carl Rogers, they saw hope as something that can develop people to actualization of personal growth. But I think it's existential psychology that sees hope as fundamental to the human condition. It's an essential element of our existence and our survival. The hope theory is perhaps the most meaningful development of hope in the psychological world, to my mind. And it began only in the 1990s with Professor Snyder, who developed what's called the hope theory. And he called the science of hope. And most of the work, and the many, many thousands of hundreds of research projects on hope, is around this hope theory. And what interested Snyder was that not to define hope, but he studied hopeful people. What do hopeful people do? What do they have? And he said, hope is the sum of the mental willpower and way power you have for your goals. The people he studied said, hope, for people who are hopeful, we see they have goals, specific goals. And they also develop pathways, which means, how do I get to those goals? They build plans of some sort. They may not be very defined. But to do all this, they have to have a sense of motivation. They have to believe in themselves to do it. So here's the chicken or the egg. How do you get hope if you don't believe in yourself? Well, I guess you have to do it from different directions. You have to build a goal. You have to help with pathways. But you have to also encourage the agency to want to do it. That is where hope comes in Snyder's estimation. To him, hope is a skill and can be taught. In fact, if you go online under the adult hope scale, you'll see very easy 12 items you rate from 1 to 8, and you will get a score how hopeful you are. Now, I think it's a cute little scale, but I think it shows us that we can choose hope. But it's true, some people may have more natural hope than others. When I went on ChatGPT in the early days, I said, how many kinds of hope? I got 86 kinds of hope. And I'm not going to tell you all about those, but I want to talk about a couple of distinctions here. Realistic hope, which involves aspirations that are achievable, There's something that you can see, and unrealistic or false hope. And the people who really attack hope are usually attacking the false hope. They say it's not, it's not practical what you're talking about. And I think that they don't always understand that hope is not necessarily false hope. It's something more fundamental, a deeper existential kind of, which I'll talk about in a moment. That means I hope, I hope, therefore I am, if I can take a offshoot of Descartes. Inauthentic hope or false hope is usually based on not looking at the facts or avoiding reality. We're not talking about that. There's active hope, which taking the proactive steps I talked about in a moment. And you can also have hope and be passive. Doesn't mean you're out there making plans all the time, but the difference between hope and optimism is that you have a direction. The final point I want to talk about is radical hope. It's a really interesting concept. It's written by Jonathan Lear, the psychoanalyst philosopher, and he studied the Crow Nation, the Native American Crow Nation, the leader called Plenty Coups. And I read the book, it's fascinating. He says, what made Plenty Coups, the leader, decide at one point in time that although the tribe was devastated, they no longer were able to hunt buffalo, because no more buffalo, how can they remain alive? And he said something called the radical hope. It's a deep, resilient form of hope that sustains human spirit even when everything is devastated. In other words, you hope in life even though you don't know what you're hoping for. You just have a very basic, I call it existential hope. The radical hope is an interesting concept, I think very much connected to what Frankl was talking about. Then I decided to develop a Hope Accelerator workshop. And my idea was we all need a hope upgrade of some sort. And how can I bring people together to do a number of sessions where they'll increase their hope? So I piloted about a year ago. I've done about 6 or 7 or 8, I don't remember now, online. I think it's a really powerful program. And I've gotten very good feedback on it because basically the model goes like this. I took 4 gates to hope, which I found are practical ways of reflecting and creating more hope in your life. Meaning, gratefulness, PTG, and the hope science. And the meaning and hope gate, I call it, any of these gates are gates into doing this process, where you look at the meaning part, which I'll talk about in a second. The second thing about gratitude, and we all know that gratitude makes our lives better. It's kind of a no-brainer, the gratitude journal. And we know this very much. The more grateful we are to life, the better we'll be off in general. But I think the interesting thing that I found, the connection between gratitude and meaning. And when you study the growth from crisis that PTG is, then you realize, well, if I know that there is PTG out there, maybe I'll have a better capability to go ahead with my meaning, and to be more grateful to what my life is. And the science of hope is something that I said puts together. It's a kind of a plan which put these 4 gates together for individuals. The first gate is Frankl. And in Man's Search of Meaning, he writes, those prisoners without hope for a future were more likely than others to die of hopelessness than from lack of food or medical care. Now, Frankl did not use the word hope all that much. But if you read his works, if you connect with his philosophy, you'll see that hope is very, very prominent in what he's talking about. There is nothing in the world, I venture to say, that would so effectively help one survive as the knowledge there is meaning in life. And here's Nietzsche, the same Nietzsche who said hope was a terrible thing. He said, he who has a why to live can bear almost anyhow. In the Hope Workshop, we do an exercise around that. And I found some really interesting results. The second one of gratefulness, it's interesting and it's almost intuitive, but I found in working this workshop that people, they start reflecting on what they're grateful for, they can see how hope is more possible. I want to stress I'm talking about, all about this is personal hope. I'm not talking about hope on a national level or a group level. That's quite a different thing here. But I'm saying an individual has a responsibility and the ability to connect to hope through gratitude. And as I said, the post-traumatic growth aspect, when you learn about this and you hear case studies, then you feel, wow, it can be done. And I keep that in the workshop because it gives people a sense of possibility. And finally, there is the agency the hope in action, the hope theory. And we do that in the workshop because hope is not a plan. Hope is our plan, said Atul Gawande. I want to go through, in brief, some of the literature, like what's out there. Now, I'm not going to go through all these studies, but I wanted to show you a compendium of what I found that connected meaning and hope. In the area of illness, we found that people who were confronting diabetes and cancer, when they were able to connect to meaning, they were able to get better faster. And there's also a sense of how post-traumatic growth is possible when illness is reframed as an opportunity to search for meaning. The reframing aspect here. In trauma research, meaning making is a powerful predictor of resilience. So Southwick and Lowart studied PTSD, and they found that hope and meaning work hand in hand in the recovery of people. Even in some areas with hope in spinal injury, those who found meaning-based interventions improved their coping and also rebuilt their hope. But the mental area, the mental health area, is something very, very interesting. And I touched on that when I did my conversations with meaning, that connecting to hope in some way increases your satisfaction with life. And even people, according to Mohammedian Sun, that were suicidal improved in the study that showed how connecting to meaning. Even during COVID, they found that people who were able to connect to meaning were able to deal better with their situation. And hope, Edwards found, predicts meaning in life. They found the connection between the two. But let's take it out of the clinic, because hope and meaning is not something just about clinics. In prisons, they found people who were studying logotherapy were able to give a bigger sense of hope in their lives and to improve. And when they actually studied schools, and they found there was a connection between hope and well-being by finding meaning for students and workplaces itself. So what I'm trying to say in this slide is that it's not just about psychologists, psychotherapists, or coaches. It's about people in life. When you connect to logotherapy and find that inextricable tie between meaning and hope, I think we're better off. Now, you don't have to think about hope and meaning, well, certainly not meaning, when you talk about marriage and marital dialogue, but this study showed that when there was more sense of connection about meaning, there was greater sense of intimacy, which brought hope. And relationships were seen as a shared sites of meaning, because in theology, hope, as I mentioned earlier in the religious aspect of it, hope gives you a transcendent view of life. So you can see relationships as also a shared site of meaning. So why? Why is this important? Why is this interesting? And I wanted to see, what is it about logotherapy that fosters hope? So I went into this a bit, and I saw that actually there are 12 principles that I'll go through very briefly here that really show the connection between meaning, logotherapy, and hope. I think you can look at it, first of all, as a kind of a tree, where at the bottom you see the three big concepts of will to meaning, freedom of will, and noetic dimension. Also bring up those things, the rest of those concepts. Or you can see them as all filtering out of the same point. Be that as it may, I want to very shortly show you how I see these. So in a will to meaning, which is a core concept of Frankl, meaning pulls us forward, sustains life, but hope is rooted in purpose. When you have purpose, you can find hope. That we have freedom of will, and we have the power to choose. So hope is also connected through choice, which is connected to meaning. The noetic spiritual dimension, that we're not only mind and body, but we're spirit. There is what's called the conscience in Frankl's philosophy, and it's a transcendent love that survives. The spirit transforms suffering into hope. Responsibility is linked to freedom. So we have each moment we're asked by life to respond. Frankl has once said a very famous comment. He said, I recommend the Statue of Liberty on the East Coast be supplemented by a Statue of Responsibility on the West Coast, because Frankl believed that you don't have just will without responsibility. You don't have freedom without responsibility, because if you have that, you have chaos. The fifth concept is the meaning of the moment. The meaning is situational. It's here and now. It's not a fluffy idea. Meaning is where you are, what you do, how you live. But hope is always possible in the present, which is another way of looking at meaning as well. Now, the fact that meaning is individual, that we're unique, no one size fits all, that every individual has meaning, which means every individual has capacity for hope. Frankl has talked about tragic optimism, pain, guilt, and death, which kind of approximates in some way the Buddha, as he saw dukkha, the suffering. To live is to suffer, to survive is to find meaning. So hope is a radical affirmation in suffering. But logotherapy has a future orientation. He looks to the future, the not yet. So does hope. Future gives direction, and fear is overcome when you have meaningful goals. And back to where I talked about before about the hope theory, then you can overcome your fear and you go to the future. But interestingly enough, logotherapy speaks about the past, because you have storage of meaning in the past. Whatever you've done in your life is stored, it does not go away. Hope is also what has been, and it cannot be lost. So if you look at logotherapy across time, it's both a past and a future orientation with the present in mind. The past has stored meaning, the future has the hope not yet done, and the meaning in the moment is we're asking to respond to life. Frankl sees life as holistic. One of the things that Frankl could not stand was reductionism, a very technical view of the human being. He says, no, we are holistic. We are the human being, and we're both mind and body and spirit. We always oriented toward meaning. So hope helps us see the holistic point of life. Conscience is an organ of meaning. Hope stays grounded in truth and values when you talk about conscience. And finally, self-transcendence. Frankl said, the more one forgets himself by giving himself to a cause to serve another person to love, the more human he is and the more he actualizes himself. So Frankl had this discussion with Maslow, believe it or not, and he thought that self-actualization was not the goal of man. It was a self-transcendence. When you have self-transcendence, then you actualize better. Frankl's focus was always on serving something, a cause, a meaning, a person. Transcendence is a key concept for Frankl. I want to talk about my last part of my presentation here, 4 examples of meaning and hope. And each of these 4 examples, I've carefully shown them and to show a different aspect of how I see hope and meaning coming together. The first is the story of Dr. Tamar Yehuda Cohen. She was a brilliant scientist in Israel, a world-class researcher with 22 patents, flying around the world with all kinds of collaboration. And one day, she had a major brain aneurysm. Later on, she also had a cancerous growth in her brain, left her without speech, partially paralyzed, suffering from epilepsy. And she writes, I asked myself, if all this is gone, who am I? And what am I to do in life? So she embodies what it means to take your pain and move it into purpose. She became a mentor and guide. She created rehabilitation coaching, which is a very, very particular thing that she does. She embodies the attitude on suffering, that you can affirm life even where there's great loss. She became hope for others by living meaningfully for herself. In her words, she said, I discovered I'm much more than a brilliant scientist or a lecturer. I lost both of these things. What remained was my stubbornness, my chutzpah, not to give up, my perseverance, my out-of-the-box thinking. And that is who I truly am. I think this is a wonderful example of what we're talking about, of finding meaning and creating hope. Here's Dr. Tamar walking in the Alps. She said it wasn't easy, but she was able to do it because her real desire to do it. The second example is a different thing. It's meaning and hope at the end of life. Some may say, how can you have hope at the end of life? Isn't that a contradiction in terms? Well, I want to talk to you about Professor Ben Korn, a world-class oncologist in Israel, born in America. And he says, for many years, when you're in medical school, you don't talk about this hope stuff. We're very, very, evidence-based, data, where we're going. And hope is kind of this fluffy concept that I didn't really believe very much in, and I didn't know what to do with. But over time, I realized that there was a whole world that I hadn't seen and I embraced hope, and I do today. And he talks about a story that I think is very, very indicative of this approach. He talks about a 55-year-old Jewish man who immigrated from France, diagnosed at the age of 55 with pancreatic cancer. After several treatments, there was nothing more to offer him. So he says, Korn, I entered his room to tell him he had 6 months to live. And he waved his hands in despair to signal that he didn't care about the illness. What depressed him was the fact that he was invested in what's called Daf Yomi, a 7-year Talmud study of 2,711 pages that they do for 7.5 years. He had been studying for years, and he was a religious person. He was just 1 year away. He felt robbed of a chance to finish because I told him that he had 6 months to live, more or less. That's what made him depressed. Right then, I caught myself and I said, you know what? Thinking hope, he said to himself, if I can arrange with the rabbi that you get a double portion every day and study 2 pages instead of 1, would you go for it? And he said, of course I would. Can you do that for me? I said, I have no idea, but I'll try to do it. Make a long story short, he found it. He did it. He completed it all in half the time. And 1 month later, he died. But Professor Korn says he died with hope because he had meaning in something that we had given him and it wasn't to do with his cure. Because hope is a skill, says Korn. It can be taught like training a muscle in the gym. Because we all, as human beings, we all crave hope. The third example, I talk about something in a different part of the world, the Society of Snow. You may have heard this story. An amazing story in 1972, where a group of rugby players from upper class families were crashed in the Andes Mountains. And they were up there, and in the end, 16 survived for 72 days. Now, how they survived was that first of all, a lot of the newspapers wrote about the cannibalism. They had to go into cannibalism. But what the later accounts and later movies shows that what kept them together was solidarity, was the fact that they had a task and they started to improvise. They were 18 years old, so one had like a year, or 19 years old, of medical school, he became the doctor. One had a year of engineering school, he became the engineer. One had studied theology, and you started talking to them about life and death.
Ronnie,
survival.
I have to interrupt. I have to go down to the bomb shelter. I don't know when I'll be back. Sorry.
Okay, sorry, yeah. Go ahead, Batya. Okay, I'm still here.
I got your back as co-host.
Okay. That's life where we are. Okay. So what I want to say about these people here, it was an amazing group. And they found a radio, and the radio, they heard that they were looking for them. And then they heard on the radio that the search parties were off. They decided were not able to be found. Imagine this immense ability, this immense belief in life and being saved, and suddenly you hear that you're not going to be saved. But what they talked about, these people who survived, they walked for 10 days. They were found by a mule packer on the side, these 2 individuals who grew to be a famous cardiologist and a famous entrepreneur. They said that we want to tell you that what's very important here is not that, we ended up having to do cannibalism or not, but when we all began to learn that we have our own personal Andes, that even in despair, we can choose life, that we didn't turn our backs on each other, but we supported each other. We gave each other a task. We gave each other the belief that there's meaning in what they're doing. And this helped us going on. I think is an amazing example of logotherapy and survival. Hope was not optimism, but defiance of the human spirit. And I come to my last slide, which will be shown in the video I'm going to show of my father's survival in the Holocaust. I'll not tell the story now because you'll see it in the video. But I'll just say that my father, he was on the right-hand side and the left side on the left side there, this sister in the middle. They were the 2 that survived out of the entire family. And I'll just say that my father, a Holocaust survivor who survived under the Nazis for years, they have many stories. But the story you're about to see, and the one I want to talk about, is a formative story for my father, and I must say I learned also from me, because only when I was 41 years old and I went on a road trip with my family with my father did I realize so many things I didn't know before. That I realized how deep his story was. And although my father did talk, he didn't say it all. And I only learned the meaning that he was holding from this story here. My father went on and to become an educator, a principal, a journalist, a leader of Jewish culture or Yiddish culture in Israel and in America. But I only in 2019, when my father died, did I really start to say, well, my father is no longer here. So what am I going to do about his story? And I decided I need to tell the story. And I was very, very ambivalent because if you'll see the video, it's very personal, it's very emotional. I asked myself, where's my responsibility here? To what question am I responding to? And is it right to share this very intimate stuff with the world? Or should I keep it to myself? So I decided that my father embodied what I call radical hope, existential hope. And therefore, I decided to share the story where I can in a selective manner because I think it is something we learned from and certainly has been very important for me. The last thing I will say before we go to the video is my father became a journalist after the war in a displaced persons camp called Eschwege in Germany. And if you look at this newspaper, which I copied, if you read the Yiddish, it's Unsere Hoffnung, which sounds like in Yiddish, in German, hope. The left-hand side, you'll see our hope. I didn't realize this. He was editor of this newspaper. Only after I began to study hope did I see that my father was connected to the name itself. And that moved me very much. A few concluding thoughts before we go into the video. I found Frankl's ideas a foundation for why hope is possible under all circumstances. Logotherapy empowers individuals across every field of life in society. We need logotherapy, and we need logotherapy to talk about hope. I can hardly imagine a place and a time where we need it more than we need today. So without further ado, I'm going to move over to the film. And I just ask that the film was 10 minutes. If you have to leave, go ahead and leave, no problem. But I would like to take a moment of silence after the film before we open up for questions. Thank you very much.